Oh, Jared Chapin asks a really specific and awesome question. Do you think a 1022 metal lathe would be good enough size to not only make a lightsaber, but most of the projects that you have made in your career? Okay. Let's start with the first part of your question. A 1022 metal lathe. That usually the four numbers in the nomenclature of a lathe refer to, the first two refer to the swing, and that is the maximum size of a round object you could hold in that lathe. In this case, 10 would mean a 10-inch diameter would be the max you could hold. And then 22, the second two numbers in the four-number appellation of a lathe, would be the length of the bed. So that would be a 10-inch diameter that you can effect 22 inches of. And the second figure is usually like the most ideal figure. I would think that for a 1022 lathe, you'd be looking at, you're working with about 18 inches for the largest amount of kind of work that you'd be doing. That size lathe is absolutely sufficient for making a lightsaber. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Stefan Gottsewinter mostly works on a lathe that is about that big or smaller. And Chris from ClickSpring is doing all of that lathe work on a shear line, which is tiny. Now, he does a lot more refined small parts than I do on my, I've got a 1540. That's a 15-inch swing with a 40-inch bed. To me, that's a bread and butter size, and I like the beefiness of my lathe. It's 3,000 pounds because it allows me to do a lot of work quickly. But 1022 metal lathe, it depends on the brand. But yeah, absolutely. That is big enough to make most movie prop stuff that you would want to make. 10 inches? Yeah. Yeah. You could do most of the work on an R2-D2 on that size lathe. Most of the lathe work required for an R2-D2. Let's see here. What do you think of spacesuits for animals? I think this is Tigershire W. That's the only hanging Chad name on these sheets. Or it might be Oda Ibsen. At any rate, the question is, what do you think of spacesuits for animals, like the ones for dogs that the Russians sent into space? Do you have any desire to eventually have replicas of that kind? Maybe Cosmos from Guardians. Well, Cosmos is based on, if I'm correct, exactly that Russian dog spacesuit. And you should just look up Russian dog spacesuit because that thing is super cool. It's literally a G-suit for this poor dog with a helmet. Humans, man. I don't envy that dog, and I'm sad about how that dog's life probably went. And that being said, I'm totally obsessed with the dog spacesuit. Brian Nagata and I have texted back and forth about it here and there about replicating it because a dog spacesuit is just such a spectacularly weird thing. I love the idea of animal spacesuits. Just like Mouse Guard makes little swords and armor for tiny mice, I love the idea of a whole suite of animal spacesuits. Parrots! Pangolins! Yeah, no, that would be that would be a very, very fun excursion to design and make a bunch of animal spacesuits. So what do I think of them? I think they're awesome. Oh, here we go. D-Friendly. This is the question I couldn't find earlier. D-Friendly said, one of my favorite myths you tested on Mythbusters was dipping your hand into molten lead. Was that as surreal and experienced as it seemed? Yeah, totally. So the myth is that you can actually dip your fingers into molten lead without injury if you do it really quickly. What? Yeah. For the record, lead melts at something above... I'm not going to ask my... Excuse me. I'm not going to ask my digital assistant right now, but lead melts at somewhere over 600 degrees Fahrenheit. That seems like a temperature that would burn the crap out of you, right? Well, it turns out that it would. However, at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, if you continue heating the lead to 800 plus degrees, it is then hot enough to flash off the moisture that is inherent in your skin and create what's called the Leidenfrost effect. And the Leidenfrost effect, you've seen it in high school physics when your teacher heated up a metal rod to being cherry red hot and put it in water. And when they put it in water, you could see this like shield of steam around the end of the object. And this is the water trying to touch the steel, but flashing to steam so quickly because the steel is so far above the boiling point of water that it creates this barrier. And that barrier is called the Leidenfrost effect. And it does actually work. What's funny is we learned the differential. We had the figures that said lead at 800 degrees, but then we noticed that lead melted at a much lower temperature. So we're like, well, we should try it there. And we had this vat of lead being heated in Jamie's shop. And we were like, we shouldn't use our fingers for the first test. We should use a hot dog because it's got like a skin on it and it's got a similar density to flesh. So let's take a hot dog, and we put the hot dog in the lead at 670 degrees Fahrenheit, and we could see that it was visibly like altered, and that seemed problematic. And so we were like, we're not really willing to do this at this temperature. But we were really sure that it had been done. We'd seen footage of it being done by chemistry teachers and such. So then we looked at the numbers and we saw 800 degrees. We're like, okay, let's raise the temperature of this lead. And when we got to 800 plus degrees, we put the hot dog in, and it totally showed much less damage to the hot dog on that second try. And the reason it turns out is because it's at the normal melting temperature of lead, it's not hot enough to flash that off to steam, and you could still get burnt. But at the hotter temperature, and I am so not recommending that you try this at home, really don't. Because when we did it, and by the way, we gamed this by actually getting our hands moist. I wanted to dip my hands in lead, but I didn't want to get burnt. So, I added some extra moisture to the surface of my hands, dipped it in water, and then dipped it in lead, and dipped it in lead like this, boop, like that, boop, boop. And in that period of time, that 300 milliseconds, my hands were in the lead. I'm not kidding. I could feel the lead, the moisture boiling on the whole surface of my skin. Weird feeling. Even Jamie was like, that feels weird. It was really, really a spooky feeling because you don't want molten metal boiling on your skin. It's generally frowned upon. Yeah, just as surreal as you thought. That was a really, really, really fun day. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're going to do one more question. Kenny Tate asks, any advice in getting correct scaling when using reference pictures? I have trouble with that. Yeah, Kenny, I do too. Everything I scale from pictures ends up too big or too small. And the main reason is the parallaxing effect. The ideal picture of an object is taken from the longest lens possible. If you have something like this and you have a ruler on here, let's say you have divisions, like this, and then you put this here and you take a picture, these ruler markings don't mean anything to your object because the lens is creating this triangle where every vantage point along this is slightly different. This is the parallaxing effect. And it's very quick how even a ½ inch of depth with a close-up lens can create like a 25% distortion in your scaling of an object. So my advice would be, if scaling an object from a picture correctly is really important to you, and you are lucky enough to have a ruler in that picture, my thinking would be to take something that you know how big it is and take a similar picture of it with a ruler. Sometimes there's software that can help you figure out what lens was used on a camera. If it was taken with a digital camera, that's probably in the EXIF data. You can pull that out in Photoshop and take a look at what lens and focal length the picture was shot from. My best advice would be, if it's mission critical to get the scale right, I would take a second picture with the same lens and try and use the comparison between those to educate yourself on the final size of your object. If all you have is a dollar bill, which is a great thing to use for reference because they're pretty much exactly six inches long, again, you've got to note how far it is from the object. The ideal place for a ruler when you are measuring something... Stop talking. The ideal place for a ruler when you're measuring an object is literally exactly in the middle of its side profile, like right there. Back here, all of a sudden you could get into a radically different size. Up here, you might get a radically different size. I hope that helps. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us even further, you can by becoming a tested member. Details are, of course, below, but it includes all sorts of perks, and we're building them all the time. You get advanced word and behind-the-scenes photos of some of our projects. Questions, you get to ask direct questions during my live streams, and we have some members-only videos, including the Atom real-time series of unbroken, unedited shots of me working here in the shop. They are weirdly meditative. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you on the next one.